Hello and welcome on into the show. It's a great day. I think it's a great day to talk money. What do you think, Phil?
Every day is a great day to talk money, Jessa.
I guess that's true. We need to be planning. Let's be proactive here. This is Lowcountry Money Talk. Phil Bloyd is here, and we are going to talk about, well, all kinds of things today.
Busy, busy, busy.
So obviously, Phil, with your position in Revolutionary Financial Group, you're going to help us navigate what's going on right now. We got some current events to talk about, and unfortunately, the picture's not getting really a whole lot better.
Right. I mean, everything's kind of the same. So we're looking for some glimmer of hope, good news, whatever. I haven't seen it much. Yeah. But, you know, we're looking at high gas prices through summer, maybe up to $6 a gallon. So that's hurting our, savings. We've got to pay more for energy.
I never thought I'd see $6.
$6 is a big
number.
Oof. In California, $8 in some stations now.
Oh, wow. That hurts. I mean, that really does. You'd think it'd be affecting traffic and driving. Doesn't seem to be.
People have been locked down. So I think, again, with the summer, we're looking for higher oil prices. The latest news is Saudi Arabia may be pumping out a little bit more, but that's just going to cover the shortage from Russia, because now the Europeans are cutting off the oil from Russia, most of it. So I think we're just being in that high gas environment through traveling season.
I guess we're just going to have to get used to it and, make some adjustments elsewhere. Mm-hmm. You mentioned to me before we started the show that a hurricane is coming, and I thought, boy, Phil's talking about weather today, but you're talking about a financial hurricane.
I think it's hurricane season.
That's true.
Well, when you hear the leader of maybe the largest bank, Jamie Dimon, go out and say, hey, there's a hurricane, it's right here and it's coming our way. We just don't know the severity of that. And he's speaking of a financial hurricane. And, we don't want to do that to scare people, but we want to be ready.
Yes, absolutely.
So if we just bury our heads in the sand and say everything's okay because I'm not going to listen, I don't think that's the greatest approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So planning for, times where we need to really be prepared and protect ourselves. Two words I want to walk through really quickly, if you will. Recession and stagflation.
Right.
Give us the overview on what we can expect.
Two views on recession. One, we're kind of living in it now. That's one view. The other view is, no, it's going to come later. Don't really know yet. We're still waiting for the end of this quarter, which will be the second quarter, which will be the end of June, to see how that kind of plays out. So did we have a negative quarter? If we did, then technically that's a recession. But you could be having a personal recession now. You're spending more for energy, you're spending more for food, that money's got to come from somewhere. You're going to have to take more out of your savings, which means you may pay more in taxes depending on where you're taking the money from.
Right.
So that's that. Stagflation just means that we're, in high inflationary, and then we go into high unemployment and people aren't working and everything is just kind of stagnant.
Well, I guess that's where the name originates, which makes sense.
Yeah.
So with the minute and a half we have left before we head to break, let's just talk a little bit about what we can do here and how the risk versus reward connection plays a role.
So Jessa, we always talk about the risk versus reward. Am I willing to risk more of my savings to get a higher rate of return into retirement? What I've been seeing, unfortunately, in this area is people are taking huge amounts of risk, but they're forgetting their age somewhat. So it's very important that as we grow older, we may feel young, right? But we need to make sure that our portfolio is following our age. So right now we have a lot of new folks that I have been seeing in the area, and they're just overly invested in risk assets, meaning they're taking a huge beating right now because the market pulled back. And then on the other side, people were like, well, I don't take any risk at all, so I'm all in my checking account, and that doesn't work either.
Right.
So, some things we can look at in lowering our risk would be maybe working on some safer type investments or something, but hold them for a longer period of time to get a better rate of return even on the safer asset.
Right.
But not having too much in equities right now.
Boy, and you talked about being overexposed versus underexposed in another episode, and I guess that's kind of what you're talking about now, making sure you have the right amount.
We don't want to get burned.
You don't want to get burned. Oh my goodness. That's a good place to end it. We're going to head to a break. We've got lots of questions for you, Phil, when we come back. All right? Hope you stick with us. Welcome back into Lowcountry Money Talk. We are here today talking about money, of course, and that's what we're going to do. We talked a little bit about current events. Current events are an important way to make sure we are safeguarding ourselves against what's going on. Phil, thanks for joining us.
I'm still here.
You're still here. Right. I'm so glad you stuck with us. Phil's with Revolutionary Financial Group, and now we're going to get into the thought-provoking questions of the day. Does that sound good to you?
I like it.
I know. And you always have great answers for us.
Let's try.
So one thing we want to talk about is really connecting, what's going on with current events to what's going on with your personal portfolio. Yeah. And one thing we got to really look at and think about is, have we had our retirement portfolio stress tested? Yeah. And basically just to see how market losses might impact your retirement security.
If you haven't, you are now, because we are in a rough patch as far as the equity side of the market's going right now. A lot of unknowns. So a lot of people will see the stress, here, they're feeling the stress. They're, oh gosh, I don't even want to look at my statement or this or that. Well, now it's telling you something. So we need to look at it. We need to do some comparisons. We need to see if you're overly invested in risk assets that are moving down. How much do we have on the safe side? How much income do we need? Where we're going to take it through? All of these things you need to be doing right now. Don't wait until summer's over.
No. Okay.
Because things are moving very quickly.
Right, and I think an important question that you and I have discussed on the break a little bit, and one that you of course have with your clients, is sometimes we think we're in one category or another when it comes to risk. Yeah. But actually we're not, and it might be just because our definition of what is risky versus what is conservative is different. So let's talk that through a little bit. Do people tend to consider themselves more aggressive, more moderate, more conservative, and how important is that question?
Well, the first thing we need to do, Jess, is to find out what your definition of aggressive is. Conservative or moderate. What does that mean? Can you please tell me? Because the way that I see it and the way that many people that work in finance see it, maybe a book definition or something, but the way you see it or think of it. So I've seen many times when people come in to see me that they tell me that they are a conservative investor. And then when, I do an analysis of their holdings and look at the taxes that they're paying and the fees that they're paying and the income that they're taking from their savings, I might say, well, I'm seeing more of an aggressive person here. So can you please tell me what your definition of conservative is? And, I had one person one time say, well, I'm conservative because I buy mutual funds and I just hold them for a long time. I'm like, well, I don't recognize that definition of conservative. But the first thing is to ask that person, hey, tell me your definition so I'm not labeling you.
Right.
And then we'll go over that, and then I'll say, well, basically what you're telling me doesn't reflect in what I'm seeing in your report here or your analysis. So that's the first step to get that figured out.
Yeah, make sure you're on the same page. Right. And if they think they're conservative but aren't really, then we need to talk about what that should look like, and make sure your meaning is the same. There's a lot more we could talk about here in terms of investments in stocks. We're gonna, when we come back, talk a little bit about objectives of your investments, and then also what people want right now is making sure that there are safe ways to earn returns. Is that even possible? So we'll walk you through that. But because we're talking so much about portfolios, I think it's a good time to let viewers know that you can help them with their portfolios by doing an actual analysis, figuring out how risky they are or should be, and really by working through Rachel on those things and making sure they get in and start looking at that now.
Sure. They need to call in, they need to talk to Rachel, they need to set up a time. The one thing we need to also add to that is not only your analysis of your holdings, but what about your taxes?
Sure.
Can we reduce your taxes? Are you paying too much in taxes because of the way that you're taking income out of your investments? So that's a very big thing. So we want to look at taxes because if we lower the taxes, that does increase your income.
Okay, well, hey, yeah, that's a great way to do it. So we'll talk a little bit when we get back more about investments, find out if there are some safe ways to get some gains,
Sure.
and I hope the answer is yes.
All right.
We'll see you on the other side of the break. Welcome back in. It's your lucky day because we're going to tell you a little bit about investment planning, and we've been talking about money. Of course we have, because that's what we do when Phil Bloyd is in the studio, and we're always glad to have you.
All right.
Before we went to break, we promised we were going to talk a little bit about investment goals and really how to maybe safeguard some goals that you might have. So it's tricky to do both, but we're going to do that. So let's start with really talking about, what we are trying to accomplish. So why is it so important to ask yourself, what's the end game? What's the long game? What's the accomplish?
Because of the markets we're in right now, and if I'm retired, and I go back to 2008, 9, and maybe my memory's not as familiar with that because it was a long time ago, but I'm retired now. So let's say, for example, back in 2008 and 9, I was working still. And we had this huge sell-off in the market. And it took about 5 years just to get back to even because we were in a nasty bear market.
Yes.
So many of our retirees today have forgotten that. Because they're like, well, I got through that fine or whatever, but maybe you weren't retired yet.
Right, right.
So you still were working, you had income coming in, you were contributing to your 401k, you had money going in at every paycheck. Well, now it's different.
Yes.
So what we had mentioned earlier was kind of checking our portfolio to make sure that, we didn't have too much risk. But we're saying, okay, if we don't do too much in risk on the risk side, if we want to take a lower risk or we want to protect our principal, how can we get a better gain from that side of things?
Yeah, and that's really what a lot of folks should be asking themselves right now is how do we safely earn more without feeling like we're overexposed or risking too much? Is there a way to do that?
Well, if I save an expense, would you say that is earning more, kind of?
Yeah, I mean, you wind up with more income, more money to spend, right?
So the thing we would want to do, first of all, is we want to tighten up things a little bit. If we're spending too much in income or if we're doing withdrawals that we don't need, we want to pull back on that somewhat until the market kind of straightens out. If I'm taking monies from higher taxable assets, maybe I want to take them from lower taxable. Maybe I have too much cash in the bank. I've already paid taxes on that money, so maybe I would want to take withdrawals from that before I take it from my IRA. And so we want to save in taxes too. But the other thing we might could do is we say, okay, we know that you're always watching the TV and they're talking about, the Treasury rate's 3% or 2.9 on a 10-year, on a 30-year, on a 5-year. Normally, the longer that we go on a asset where there's low risk or no risk, the higher return. So we may consider, instead of doing a 2-year term on something, we may go 5. Instead of 5, we may go 10.
Okay.
So that would help us to get a better rate of return on that asset without taking more of a risk. So that's one thing.
Okay, so that's way number one. That's a good, great tip, actually. So just increasing
maybe longer,
the
right?
Yeah. Okay.
Especially when I'm retired because I'm not saving anymore. Okay. The other thing we might do, let's go back to the tax thing for just a second. So we said earlier in the show, when you call in, let's look at your tax return.
Yes.
I'm not an accountant. I don't want to redo your tax return. But your tax return is history.
Yeah.
So if we don't change anything, it's probably going to look the same next year as it did this year or last year. So the idea would be, let's look at that. Let's see what's causing taxation. It could be where you're taking the income from, as I mentioned before. You could be taking it from an IRA and you're paying income taxes. And I'm like, well, how much do you have in your emergency fund in the bank? And you might say, well, I've got 12 months expenses. And I'm like, well, you're only supposed to have 6. So let's skip taking the withdrawals from the IRA now, and let's take it from that excess cash you have in the bank because you've already paid taxes on that.
That's such a great tip. You know, when we started this show, Phil, I didn't realize, honestly, how big of a role taxes played in your income, because there are so many ways that you can just really avoid having extra fees and extra taxes that do play such an important role in how much you have left and how much you're able to invest. So that's a really important pointer. Okay, we got one more segment for you here on Lowcountry Money Talk, so we're going to wrap this all up for you and make sure we can close it out strong. And we're going to do that after this break. Stick with us. Okay, we are back here on Lowcountry Money Talk. This is our final segment, so we're going to break it down for you and give you just the easy ways, kind of a recap, to make sure that you are protecting yourself against what we're hearing is a financial hurricane. Phil Bloyd, thank you for joining us for this final segment. Let's talk about it. Let's kind of recap. You know, we ended our last segment really talking about saving money by trying to save on taxes. So let's start there.
Okay. So let's talk about taxes. I know you're like, well, hey, it's summer. Why do we want to talk about taxes? Because what you do now will reflect when you're doing your return next year or in April or whatever. So now's the time to change things up. If you wait till December, that's not going to work.
And that is when I always start thinking about it. It's December. How did you know that?
Well, you know, I've been around a minute or two. So after 30 years, there's some things that everyone hates taxes for the most part. So most people I see are paying too much in taxes. And that's just like paying too much for gas. You know, you're not getting any further down the road by paying more. You're just losing more income. So what we would like to do, more than not, I always ask people, I say, you're working with your financial advisor. Did they ask you to bring in your tax return to review? And they're like, no.
No. Yeah, I didn't realize how important that was, quite frankly.
Well, it's going to show me a lot of things.
It shows you a lot, of
Maybe
course.
you have some capital gains that you have carried forward, some losses that we may have some deductions. You know, if your advisor doesn't know this, then, you know, that's not a good thing, because they need to know, well, hey, if I sell this one, is it going to be taxed, or do I have an offset to that? So you're going to want to know that.
Right.
The other thing, too many people are just going straight to that IRA for withdrawals, which I mentioned a little bit before.
Yes.
And it's going to count as ordinary income, every penny of it, where if I could take the funds from somewhere else that aren't taxable, wow, if I could save $1,000 or $2,000 or $2,000 this year just because of where I'm taking the income, of course I'm going to need less.
Right.
So that's a very important thing.
It is an important thing, because what you're saying is not only could you be taxed on the IRA withdrawal, but then you might even get hit twice if it pushes you into a different tax bracket.
True.
So that's big trouble.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk more about lowering fees here and other ways we can do that.
So again, we're trying to batten down the hatches, because, you know, we could call the theme the hurricane that's coming. You know, we'll borrow that from Jamie Dimon. But, you know, we want to batten down the hatches. Now, I don't know anyone that would be disappointed if they prepared for a hurricane but it didn't come. Do
Yeah.
you?
No, I think we'd celebrate, right?
Right. So all of this is just in preparation, and by doing this, we're going to be more financially prepared for retirement and everything else just by tightening up. So whatever we're talking about today will help us regardless. And we don't want any fear mongering or any of that stuff.
Right.
So the one thing we're going to talk about, if we can lower fees and expenses, that's another way. That means, hey, I won't have to take as much income out.
Right.
you know, because I've lowered my fees and expenses. I've seen people come in and they may have an investment account and they're paying an advisor 1% or whatever it may be, 1.5%. And when I look inside the portfolio, it has mutual funds that are charging 1.5 to 1.8 or whatever. So these are additional fees and expenses. So that's going to drag my return. So if that's an equity that's moving down, it's going to move down more because I'm paying more in fees and expenses. So we need to clean that up.
Absolutely.
So we've got the taxes cleaning up a little bit. We've got the fees and expenses. Some people may have some certain type of investments, and they may have internal cost of 4%. They may have income riders and all this other stuff. And we call and check, and I'm like, do you realize that you know, if you have $200,000 in this, that it's costing you $8,000 a year?
I think sometimes we just don't realize that, actually, and that's exactly what you're going to do for us, right?
Well, we got to, you know, if you're in an account and you're paying 4% in fees and the account is declined 20%, you're still going to have the fees. If it's zero return, you're losing 4%, $8,000 a year in fees. So we've got to clean all of that up, and then, you know, we'll make a nice little plan and say, well, hey, if we do all of these things, instead of taking $12,000 a year out of my investments, maybe I only need $6,000.
Okay.
So.
Hey, that sounds better. That sounds better. That's going to set you up for safety, like you said, and make sure that you are protected against a potential financial hurricane.
Absolutely.
That looks like it might be coming.
Let's get ready.
All right. Make sure you give the office a call, get that portfolio analysis, get your risk assessment, and also don't forget to tune in next time right here on Lowcountry Money Talk. Thanks for watching.